So perhaps you've heard some well-intentioned advice that all you need in order to make vitamin D is to get out when ultraviolet B light is present, which let's just generalize that is almost always during the summer months from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. And all you need to do is get outside, maybe get 10, 15, 20 minutes of sunlight on the skin, and then you can hide the rest of the day because ultraviolet light is bad for you, right? But you do need that vitamin D. I have found some research that indicates that that is an inaccurate statement. And I want to highlight the reason we need regular light exposure on the skin in order to optimize vitamin D production all summer long. So let me share my screen here. And for those of you who are tuning into this, I am hosting, if you're watching this on the day it's released, I am hosting a vitamin D and melatonin webinar today. If you can't make it live, you can get the recording for life, but I'm going to go all over the details of how to make the vitamin D, what's the timing like, what about melatonin, what about the main melatonin our mitochondria make that practically none of us are likely making these days, and it's very important as an anti-cancer preventative. So many cool things in that webinar. But in terms of vitamin D, okay, I want to highlight the research that I found from an interview that Scott Zimmerman did with Ricci Flow podcast. So very, very great interview. And Scott was talking specifically about an article he found from a researcher named Laura Hudson. On the left, where you see the words keratinocyte and fibroblast, this is a graph directly from her publication that's cited below. Now, what you see, so what are keratinocytes? Well, keratinocytes are a type of skin cell found in the outer layer of skin called the epidermis. It's a very, very thin layer of skin. And the fibroblasts are also a type of skin cell that's found in the dermal layers of the skin, which is the deeper version of the skin. But both of them are very much when we say skin, we very much consider the epidermis and dermis our skin. Now, what this particular research article looked at that I found interesting, and I also found Scott's interpretation very interesting, was that when you shine these skin cells with certain wavelengths of light, you significantly increase the amount of hydrogen peroxide that these cells produce. So cells are naturally going to produce hydrogen peroxide. It is a healthy, natural reactive oxygen species to make. Now, if you look at actually a conventional definition of hydrogen peroxide or reactive oxygen species, a lot of research will tell you that it's very damaging and horrible, and it's the reason why they've done so many studies on high-dose antioxidant consumption to get rid of those reactive oxygen species because they are bad and we don't want them to reach a certain threshold. From my perspective, I view reactive oxygen species as serving a purpose and being a signaling molecule to allow something to take place or something to be communicated. And so in this instance, hydrogen peroxide is a reactive oxygen species whose production increases drastically in the fibroblasts and in the keratinocytes in response to a blend of ultraviolet light, visible light, and infrared light. That's the line that you see on the far right of both of those graphs. So you'll see that that reached statistical significance compared to unirradiated skin, meaning the cells that were not shown any light, they did not see, they saw an average amount of hydrogen peroxide being produced. When you shine those types of skin cells with visible infrared and ultraviolet light, and also in the case of keratinocytes and fibroblasts, but to a lesser extent, you'll also see a relatively significant increase in hydrogen peroxide production. So why would this be, right? And Scott Zimmerman has a fascinating hypothesis on this. Scott's hypothesis, and this is based on the research of another individual called Yakamoto. What Yakamoto showed was that basically, so everyone has heard of hydrogen peroxide before, because what do you put in, what did you put in your hair when you were a teenager and you wanted to bleach it for the summer or put highlights in, right? You can use certain concentrations of hydrogen peroxide to essentially lighten things, right? To bleach things. I used back in the day, I remember trying to clean with more concentrated hydrogen peroxide and ending up with white splotches all over my clothes because it bleached my clothes. So why would we want the equivalent of bleach being produced in these skin cells? Well, it turns out, and this is both Yakamoto's and Zimmerman's hypotheses, is that when you take the pigmentation out of a very, very small layer of skin. We're not talking all of it, right? Like I'm not gonna all of a sudden lose all pigmentation, but it's happened in my skin. I'm gonna guarantee you because I've gotten regular sunlight exposure from spring onward. Now we're at towards the end of August. And I've gotten regular sunlight exposure on my skin. I have built melanin in my skin, but I've also optimized this small layer of photo bleached skin. So why would I want that layer to be melanin free? You can't see it. It doesn't matter what skin tone you have. You could have a lot of melanin or even less than I do, and the body is still designed to make this melanin free zone, these cells that lack the melanin. Well, why is that? What Yakamoto found was that when you have that photo bleached layer, you get 5 times the absorption of ultraviolet B light. And that's the wavelength range of light, specifically at about 280 to 285 nanometers, that transforms the cholesterol, version of cholesterol in our skin, the precursor to vitamin D, into vitamin D. And that's what you see in this graph on the right. You see where it says Pro-D. That's basically vitamin D, the cholesterol that becomes vitamin D when it absorbs the correct wavelength range of light, which, as you'll see, is around 285 nanometers, right? That's the peak. So it doesn't make beautiful logical sense that we were built so that if we get regular sunlight exposure, because what Yakamoto found and what the Laura Hudson study found was that, yes, this can happen as a one-time thing, but in order for the photo bleaching to maintain that photo bleached region, you have to get regular full spectrum sunlight on the skin. And so that photo bleached layer can be maintained so you can make more vitamin D. How many of us are just following their so many of us are following the general recommendations to avoid sunlight exposure, right? That we can supplement with vitamin D, and it's the same as getting it from the sun. Scroll back to some of my previous videos and you'll know that that's not the case. And I'm going to talk extensively about that in the webinar. Now, what I also, was alluding to at the beginning of this video was that there's a lot of people who get the well-intentioned advice of avoid the sun, hide from it, get your 15 minutes 2-3 times a week, and you're good. You're going to make plenty of vitamin D. But that's not actually enough regular full spectrum sunlight exposure to maintain this photo bleached region so that you can use those 15 minutes to make adequate vitamin D levels. 5 times the absorption, so likely 5 times the absorption of light, and you also get a region where that's increased in that particular version of cholesterol. So we're literally designed to maintain this photo bleached region, so simply that's full of pro-D cholesterol, so we can absorb the, let's say, 285 nanometer wavelength UVB light and start to synthesize vast amounts of vitamin D in a short amount of time. Likely not the case if you have not maintained this photo bleached effect in that tiny, tiny layer of skin that Yakamoto found. So that is why I encourage people to understand how to get regular light exposure on the skin in order to optimize so many aspects of health, including vitamin D production. And I am going to teach you the X's and O's. If you do not know how to do that and do it safely, I'm going to teach you the X's and O's of that in the webinar, because I really think that this is a very, very important part of getting sunlight exposure to make vitamin D in the skin that isn't talked about enough. So I'll see you in the next video.